Good afternoon, everybody. This is the afternoon session, October 11th, 2017, of the Portland City Council. Carla, if you could please call the roll.
Udaly?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Saltzman? Wheeler?
Here. So we have a code of conduct. I will summarize it in one sentence. Treat everybody with respect. All right, we got that done. Read the one and only item for this afternoon, please.
Item 1128, accept Portland's housing bond policy framework to guide investment of bond funding based on community needs.
Thank you, Carla. Colleagues, today I'm very proud to bring to you an exciting milestone and a step in the right direction to addressing Portland's housing crisis. Portland voters made history when they passed the city's first affordable housing bond with an overwhelming 62% of the vote. At $258 million, the Portland Housing Bond is the largest general obligation bond ever passed by Portland voters, and it's a first-of-its-kind funding mechanism for our city. These resources will allow the city to create an additional 1,300 units of affordable housing. Because this is an historic opportunity to stabilize families and mitigate displacement, we wanted to make sure that we got it right. That's why when I came into office, we pressed pause to develop a strategy to use these funds effectively and maintain the trust of the public. That meant we took the time necessary for a deliberate and thoughtful community process, and the results are better because of it. Today, I bring you a framework established by dozens of community partners, many of whom are represented here today, and the Portland Housing Bureau to guide us in spending these funds equitably and efficiently. The voters have trusted us with their hard-earned dollars, and we have an absolute responsibility to maintain that trust by ensuring that our actions align with the intent of voters. By taking this additional time, I know that we're ensuring the maximum impact of bond dollars and setting ourselves up for a positive outcome to share with the voters. This policy framework reflects the diverse perspectives and expertise of an 18-member stakeholder advisory group and the diverse voices of Portlanders from across our community to ensure that the investments made with this resource reflect the values of the community and help those who need the housing the most. This afternoon, we're going to hear from committee members, Bureau staff, and community partners on their hard work in getting this framework in place. I'll now take the opportunity, colleagues, to turn this over to Andrea Valderrama, Senior Policy Advisor in my office on the bond, Shannon Callahan, the Assistant Director of Policy and Strategy for the Portland Housing Bureau, and Jennifer Cheng, the Senior Policy Coordinator for the Housing Bureau, to provide an overview of the framework and the community engagement process. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Like the Mayor said, my name is Andrea Valderrama. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for the bond at the Mayor's office, and it's really a pleasure to be here today and to provide with you the policy framework which will guide the Bureau, the Bond Oversight Committee, and you all as City Council to ensure our bond is invested to maximize its impact in places and in ways that are consistent with our community's values and our community's goals. I and the Mayor have been present throughout this detailed process, and we've heard robust, honest, and often challenging questions and conversations from community members, and we explore the opportunity before us to make the greatest impact with the housing bond. And I wanted to briefly extend my thanks to members of the Stakeholder Advisory Group and for committing their time, perspectives, and expertise through this process. I'd like to briefly cover the major milestones we've accomplished together. As you know, last November, Portland voters approved the state's first voter-approved funding measure for affordable housing. In March, under direction of Mayor Wheeler, an 18-member public advisory body was appointed to develop a policy framework to guide the city in further bond investments. You'll hear from two of those members, Alan Lazo and Frida Christopher, following our overview. Over the past 6 months, the advisory group deliberated over opportunities and challenges before us and wrestled with how to identify the priorities that will allow us to be most effective among so many important and sometimes competing needs. The Housing Bureau, along with community partners, then conducted robust outreach and engagement to gather community feedback on the draft over a 5-week period. After compiling all the comments received, the advisory group reviewed those comments at its final meeting on September 27th to finalize the policy framework. And I will turn it over now to Shannon Callahan, who will go into a deeper dive of that policy framework.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Mayor and Commissioners, I am Shannon Callahan with the Portland Housing Bureau. The policy framework you have before you today establishes guidelines and goals for Portland's housing bond. And importantly, it establishes 7 key guiding principles which will frame and guide all of our investments and decision-making going forward. The first key principle is collaboration, aligning with our private and public partners and our policies and programs to maximize efficiency. We will also work to promote other community benefits with our investments, like prevailing wage jobs, hiring disadvantaged minority women and emerging small businesses, and utilizing green building practices. We will advance racial equity for communities disproportionately impacted by the shortage of affordable housing options, by housing discrimination, by gentrification, and by involuntary displacement. This bond will support opportunity through citywide investments that offer broad access to public amenities like transportation, schools, food, and grocery stores. We will be resourceful by making responsible investments in housing solutions with innovation and creativity. And we will demonstrate exemplary stewardship of public resources, including the oversight of the bond by an independent public oversight committee. And finally, we will be transparent in our decision-making by providing clear and consistent communications with the public and fostering opportunities for public involvement. And now I'd like to turn to some of the specific goals of the bond. A key portion of the advisory group's work was to set the bond production goals. This framework reaffirms the goals that were devised when council referred the bond to voters. The bond will produce a minimum of 1,300 new units of housing affordable for households with incomes at or below 60% of the median family income. 600 of these will be deeply affordable. Half, or 650 of these units, will be able to accommodate families, so there'll be 2-bedroom sizes and larger. The framework also establishes an important new target for 300 supportive housing units. And we are already working with the Joint Office of Homeless Services to plan for those units as we develop and acquire new housing. I'd now like to turn it over to Jennifer Chang for the Portland Housing Bureau, who led most of the stakeholder advisory group process very ably. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Commissioners. My name is Jennifer Chang. I'm with the Portland Housing Bureau. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. The framework provides priority communities for bond resources to further our community-wide goals of preventing displacement, advancing racial equity, and also making a visible impact on ending homelessness in our community. By aligning with our homeless service system, culturally specific, and other community partners, we'll create housing for communities that are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis, with a particular focus on communities of color, families, including families with children, immigrants, and refugees, and intergenerational households. We also will want to focus on creating opportunities for households experiencing homelessness or facing imminent displacement. In the process of identifying these communities, the advisory group reviewed and was informed by data from the Housing Bureau's annual State of Housing Report and the point-in-time count of homelessness. These reports and others show that Portland's housing crisis disproportionately impacts people of color, low-income families, and individuals and families experiencing homelessness. The data clearly shows that there are large areas in our city where communities of color cannot afford to rent anything larger than a studio apartment. This is also true for low-income families and immigrants. In our most recent point-in-time count, we have more than 4,000 people who are homeless in our community on any given night, more than 40% of whom are persons of color. And also, our current city's housing stock is heavily weighted towards smaller size units, which emphasizes the need for more affordable family size, larger units. On the important question of location, the framework clearly calls out the Housing Bureau will use a racial equity lens and analysis at the forefront of when we assess and make selections around opportunities. The projects will be selected with a focus on the following priorities. We want to invest where there is little or no existing current affordable housing or resources. We also want to strive to balance investments throughout the city and consider school catchment areas and areas where there's planned transit or infrastructure projects.
I have just a quick question,
Sure.
if I might interrupt. When you're saying that invest where there's currently little or no affordable housing, in the
Right.
past that's meant that we've put a lot of money into places like South Waterfront.
Yeah.
So could you just explain
Yeah.
that? Well, maybe it'll come up in the presentation.
Yeah.
Well, Commissioner, there are large swaths of the city, for instance, inner southeast Portland, and mostly due to the lack of a URA. URAs typically cover only 15% of our city. So there are large portions where we don't actually have a number of affordable housing. I'm thinking particularly of areas like Selwood, the Hawthorne District, other areas. They would not necessarily be referring just to South Waterfront. Also, there's large portions
No,
of...
that was just an example,
Yeah.
but you know, the land is more expensive in those areas, so we'd get maybe fewer units. I'm sure you'll go into it as we keep going. I just wanted to flag that piece.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, that is a key issue.
And while you're paused, a couple slides ago, where you talked about the 1,300 units.
Yeah. Should I?
If you did the math below, it only adds up to 1,250 units. So I
Right.
was wondering,
So-
where's the other 50 units?
So these aren't, they're not exclusive of each other. So there's, of the 1,300 total units, 600 will be deeply affordable at the 0 to 30%. And then of the 1,300, also we want to have at least 650 be larger size.
Okay.
So there could
So-
very well be many larger size family units that are 0 to 30.
Okay,
Jennifer, since
thanks.
we're doing some preliminary stuff, I think it's helpful for the public to know what we're talking about when we say 0 to 30% AMI.
Yes.
So at some point, could you just put the human face on
Yeah.
that range? And the second is, you use the term households throughout this. And we should be clear that a household could be one person, or it could be a family of 3 or 4. So for example,
That's right.
when we talk about 300 units of permanent supportive housing, that may skew more one-person housing, just by definition.
Right.
But household covers 1 to 3, 4, whatever, and so. But if at some point you put the human face on 0 to 30 and 0 to 60, I think it brings more people along.
Yeah, thank you. So as we look towards implementation, we will want to use a vulnerability and opportunity analysis to guide decision-making. The framework creates a clear preference for acquiring existing buildings in areas at high risk of gentrification, especially where there are a high number of residents from communities of color. There's also a preference for both acquiring and building new housing in high opportunity areas. Each property we acquire will be run through a lens of racial equity, vulnerability, and opportunity. I just wanted to take a few minutes to summarize the community feedback that we conducted as part of this process. Once we compiled with the advisory group and completed the draft framework, the Housing Bureau and community partners conducted a community engagement from mid-August to late September, so about a period of 4 to 5 weeks. We worked with Metropolitan Alliance for the Common Good, Opal Environmental Justice, and our advisory group members to help identify key groups that we should reach and talk to. We also partnered with the community engagement liaisons through the Office of Neighborhood Involvement to reach over 300 community members from 16 linguistically specific immigrant and refugee groups. And we also made presentations to stakeholder groups and received detailed comments from many groups and organizations, of which are listed here on the slide. Finally, we collected comments through a community survey. And through these cumulative efforts, we reached nearly 1,000 community members, and a significant amount of comments were collected. As you can imagine, we have over 50 pages worth of comments, which are included as an Appendix E to the policy framework. And overall, there were several key themes that arose. One is that the community wants to see housing spread across the city and prioritizing creating more housing in areas with mixed income environments. Also, that housing should be created close to amenities, transportation, schools, parks, and groceries. Also, that tenant eligibility and screening criteria must be clear and must be transparent, low barrier, and also linguistically appropriate. And finally, there's a great desire, there's a great need in our community to know when housing becomes available and for the community to be informed in a culturally and linguistically appropriate manner. So these key themes and the comments that are reflected in the policy framework that you have before you today. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present.
Very good. Thank you, Andrea, Shannon, and Jennifer, for that information. Next, I'd like to call up Alan Lazo, who's the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and also thanks to Frida Christopher for stepping in today for the East Portland Action Plan. They both participated in the Stakeholder Advisory Group, and it's good to see you both here. We also have Surya Rajzoshi, an Ohnone Community Engagement Liaison, who work to conduct direct outreach on the bond framework specific to the Nepalese community. Thank you for being here as well. Good afternoon.
I'll start. So good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Alan Lazo with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So as we move forward in this process, I first must go back a little and recognize that we would not have reached this historic moment without the many who have come to this very room, to this very table, and passionately urged all of us to get to this moment. People like Justin Burry, who passionately implored you to declare a housing emergency. People like Susan Emmons and Bobby Weinstock at Northwest Pilot Project, who over the years have gently and not so gently reminded us of the shortage of affordable housing in our community for those extremely low income individuals. And people like Jess Larson and the Welcome Home Coalition, who tirelessly advocated for additional local funding for affordable housing. And so now it's our time, and this is that moment that we waited for. And this is us as a community that invests in affordable housing equitably, justly, quickly, efficiently, and consistently in times to come for all of its members, especially those who have been most harmed and who are most vulnerable. We need to recognize that this new resource that we have cannot and will not serve all the needs of all of our populations, and also recognize that this is not the only tool that is being implemented to solve our housing affordability crisis. But this voter and community-supported resource does represent a unique investment opportunity constrained neither by the geography of urban renewal nor the whims of the free market. It's been a great honor to serve on the Stakeholder Advisory Group with nearly 20 of the best and brightest in housing throughout the community. And you can only imagine how those conversations went when you get a group like that together in a room. So, I believe that there's been great value in taking that time and making that effort to take a pause at the beginning of this historic process, to set in place a community-driven, community-engaged framework that now defines how we move forward with this historic investment. And we need to recognize that the framework plan that the SAG created is just that, a framework for the historic task ahead of us. That framework now will guide my colleagues and I on the Bond Oversight Committee and provide a continuity of community accountability and oversight of our bond investment. One of the things that we heard loud and clear through that community engagement process is that the community also recognizes that the framework is not the end of this process, but rather the beginning. And they are also looking forward to continued engagement in the process. They're as anxious as all of us to see these investments become community assets that will house thousands of our neighbors in the years to come. You know, you saw that on the slide there. They're ready for that call to come in, get the keys, and start moving in. So ultimately, this community-driven process serves as a call for all of us, you on the council, our partners in the Bureau, all the stakeholders, and the countless community members to work together to get it right. I know that the 5 members of the Bond Oversight Committee, following the lead of the 18 Stakeholder Advisory Group members, and the community members that engaged in this process have been dedicated to getting this right to this point. And we trust that you are also ready for this historic moment. You know that I believe housing is not only a human right, but also the underlying pathway to opportunity. As an organization that's focused on ending housing discrimination and ensuring equal housing opportunity for all, we approach these affordable housing efforts with a specific focus. And it's been heartening to me and my organization to see the diverse community members of the Stakeholder Advisory Group and the community feedback that was so focused on racial equity and so mindful of the location priorities that came up. So I've very much appreciated those fair housing aspects of these discussions that have centered on creating inclusive communities and opening access to opportunity in our city. After all, Portland can't be the city that works until Portland is the city that houses all of its residents safely, stably, and affordably. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Good afternoon, Frida.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. As you can see, I don't have prepared statements. I'm stepping in, but I was a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Group as well as
And
being
Frida, I'm really sorry, but for the record, could you just state your name?
Oh, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Frida Christopher.
Thank you.
I'm a member of the Stakeholders Advisory Committee as well as co-chair of East Portland Action Plan's Housing Subcommittee. First of all, I'd like to thank the Bureau for allowing East Portland, EPAP, or East Portland Action Plan, to have a person within this committee so we could voice our concerns on what's happening in East Portland. I'm a non-housing person. For over 40 years, my focus has been education. And so the last 7 years have been a learning experience in housing. But I felt this stakeholders group was one of the most robust discussions I've ever been in. There was competing ideas of how the money should be spent, where it should be spent. And I applaud the Bureau for, as I say, herding cats to get us all together and focus us in and come up with what was truly important. I feel what is summarized in the executive summary on the criteria for our populations, as well as locations, is very key. It also is important that vulnerability is a key factor. I happen to be in East Portland's housing, EPAP's housing subcommittee on Monday, and there was one concern. We still support this framework 100%. But opportunity mapping, as it shows, which often is outdated because the information goes back to 15, is showing lack of opportunity area in East Portland for purchasing acquisition of land. We feel we are starting to gentrify, so we feel it's really important that we look at vulnerability, displacement, those items that are in the criteria as key in selection of property as well as buildings. David Douglas alone, which you know I'm on the school board, has experienced in 15-16 over 400 students who were identified as homeless by the end of the year. Last year it was over 500. We've had a drop in enrollment the last 2 years. And what we're seeing is what occurred in PPS quite a few years ago as it started to gentrify. Your school enrollment drops as the gentrification starts to occur. So I just would like to, that was one of the reasons I came today to testify also, was to share that concern. But I strongly feel if the framework is followed and its guidelines, I think selection is going to be great for the whole city and especially for East Portland. Thank you.
Thank you, Frida. Surya, good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. I'm Surya Joshi, one of the community engagement liaison who participated in outreaching Nepali and Nepali-speaking Bhutanese community. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Wheeler for extension on time frame for community engagement and feedback, which allowed Portland Housing Bureau to inform and hear from non-English speaker in a meaningful way regarding the bond policy framework. And during the survey that I conducted with the community living in eastern fringe of the city, I found them excited and very much willing to work with city on this bond. But they are equally concerned about future transparent and equitable allocation of bond-funded apartment to immigrant and refugee living in those dilapidated apartment complex. If you have visited any of the apartment complex that I did outreach on 112th and 129th Avenue mostly, it's in a dire condition. It is very important for City and Portland Housing Bureau to communicate with community even during and after the construction and acquisition of new housing property, because when I outreach the community, their concern was, okay, you come here, you talk with us about this thing, you take all this data, but then after what? Like after then, how are we going to know where are those apartments are being constructed? How do we know about that? And then who will tell us? So that was the main concern. And here I would also like to highlight the kind of efficacy of CEL program, community engagement liaison program. We were a couple of liaison who outreach Bhutanese, Nepali, Spanish speaking, and a lot of different community whose language is other than English. So it was really effective outreach as well. Most of the immigrant community who are here, they are here not just for themselves, they are here for their children. And housing being like the first issue for each and every family, especially in current environment where rent is so high and people can't afford to live closer to their school district, they are moving here and there. I also work at ERCO, and we have a lot of community members who are having to move to eastern side, even like east of Gresham, just to afford a livable apartment. I thank you for your prioritization and for all the work on bond, and I hope that community will get informed as the construction and acquisition and renting progresses. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Commissioner Fritz.
Well,
Thanks,
first of all,
Frida.
thank you all for your service on this committee. I know all of you are very diligent in many different areas, so thank you for all your work for the city. Just a couple of clarifications. When we talk about communities of color, I'm assuming that you include in that people from the former Soviet Socialist republics who aren't necessarily listed in the targeted groups, but obviously we know that there are lots of refugees here from Ukraine, Russia, other places.
Actually, I'm not sure. I don't think we had discussions that were that specific, but I think there is actually a definition in the framework. And so I'm actually not sure if that's in the definition, but it would certainly be something that we would need to check into, how it's being defined, because I don't think we defined it as we used the words around the table.
Okay, yeah, if you could find that.
But I do remember bringing that up because East Portland has a large population of Russian and Eastern Europeans but in the criteria, immigrants, and many of those are immigrants that fall into that group out at least in the East Portland area.
Yeah, so you had conversations, that was what was generally meant. I'm just trying to put things in the record so that down the line that's clear. And then the other question I have for you, Ms. Christopher, is about when we were doing the comprehensive plan, David Douglas was concerned about increasing the intensity of folks living there because of the school capacity. Is this kind of what you just said is the reverse of that it's gentrifying and that you are interested in East Portland in having some of these projects there?
We have always been interested in some of the projects. As we really would like to see some of the rehab out there so that the families that are currently living there stay there. We want our families to stay. We consider this a small dip, but we're still at capacity because unfortunately we were way over capacity. And it's going to take a few hundred more elementary students coming down before we're even at considering. We still have schools that are over 650 students in them. So we still have a capacity issue. And our projections with the Planning Bureau was to over the next 10 to 20 years, which they anticipate on the low end that we will, because of the zoning, we can potentially have a minimum of about 3,500 new students over the next 10 to 20 years. In my experience, as you know, I've been on the board 26 years and involved in the district for close to 40, is those estimates have always been underestimated, and we've always gotten more than what they estimated we would do. But Douglas is planning for any increase also. We're just watching the numbers and trying to work with our populations and the nonprofits that are building affordable housing out there so we can get placement for our families to stay.
Thank you.
Frida, can I jump in on that for a sec? Because I had the same reaction as Commissioner Fritz did as I was listening to your testimony. Because what we've heard historically is some pushback from some East Portland school districts about their tax base. And it is made manifest when they fall a little short on bond measures and other things. And so what we've heard in the past is we'd like more home ownership, less of the affordable housing. What I think has been problematic about that approach is that there is still a concentration of low-income families attending schools there that have the right to live in safe and decent housing. And so it's been almost a schizophrenic approach. What I hear you say, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that you fully subscribe to one of the principles that was articulated earlier, which is a balanced approach. So the whole city has an opportunity to participate. And you've specifically referred to upgrading the existing stock. And that, I think, is very important because the truth is we don't get complaints from people because Human Solutions adds a new development to East Portland. We get complaints about the crappy market rate stuff that people are forced to live in because they have no other choice that's falling down and is not fit for human habitation. The high-quality, affordable development, what we do with trusted partners, tends to be a community amenity, at least what I hear. So, again, what I hear you say is there are low-income families going to school in East Portland. They deserve to have a safe and decent place to live.
Correct.
You subscribe to the idea of a balanced approach, so the whole city gets to participate. But you're particularly concerned about upgrading the existing stock so that we have an inventory of really decent housing going forward, and that might play into our investment strategy.
Yeah, we have said for some time the stock out in East Portland is inferior, the private sector
Yeah.
stock. I strongly support Human Solution and Rose and the others that have developed, as we call it, affordable housing by design. When I was on the SAG, because I have that school hat I can wear, and that's why you saw catchment areas mentioned, is that when you get too many affordable housing, whether it's design or not design, it puts additional costs on a school district, because children of lower income don't usually have preschool, et cetera, and they require extra services, and often the family are. Douglas we have Sun School in every school. We have food pantries in every school. We're doing more and more of the social services just because our families need it. But I also understand, as you said, when gentrification started rolling through, we would want some affordable by design, as we call it. And that's what we're seeing now is the gentrification, and it's rolling fast out there. It used to be on the other side of 82nd. Housing in our area, in David Douglas, I have a friend who just got a quote of $350,000 on a 3-bedroom home in my neighborhood. even at the peak of housing, it was never that high.
Well,
It's just rolling.
Take Montevilla. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, and during my service on the council, entry-level person on my staff
Yeah.
bought her first starter home there. Now it'd be unthinkable, given what's happened to the market just in Montevilla, right at the border, and now, right at the 82nd, and now crossing over, so. it's
Yeah,
point
and
well
we're
taken.
concerned about that, and it seems odd, because I am changing my position. I've been watching this since 20 years. I first brought the cry of the increase in concentration of low income back in 95. So I started seeing it because the school is a barometer. We see it first with our free and reduced lunch starting to climb. So I think it's important to look at schools, we're infrastructure, but we're also a barometer of what's happening. And that's why I was saying this dip in enrollment is showing that just as PPS experienced the big dip back there in 90s, early 2000s, because of gentrification, we're starting to feel it out in East Portland, only we're the last, place before they're out of the city. So we want to stop it there before it push everyone out. So whether I've gotten the support of our school board with these changes and looking at what's happening now, not what happened 5 years ago, to support not only rehabbing what we have, but increasing the amount of what we have. All we ask is that they look at each catchment area so you don't overburden one school, because sometimes because opportunity and land is cheap, you might put two. And that's an extra cost on that school as well, and the kids are not as served as well, I think, when it's too concentrated in one school. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I'm seeing this change, and I guess in some ways it's good. I've been around long enough to see the changes and what's happening.
Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Surya, Frida, Alan, thank you for your testimony. And last, we'll have the Housing Bureau Director, Kurt Krieger, and Michael Buonacore, who's the Executive Director of Home Forward. They'll be our final panel before we get to public testimony. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Kurt Krieger, your Housing Director. I'd like to look back to January 6, 2017, which is the first one-on-one I had with Mayor Ted Wheeler. In his first week of service.
Wasn't that the middle of an ice storm?
That was just before the ice storm. Actually, it was a Friday.
Kurt, I believe that was a private meeting. Let's move on.
It was a private meeting. But one takeaway was at that meeting, Mayor Wheeler directed me that community agreement must be obtained before we proceed with expending additional bond resources. So we immediately set out, by we I mean the Portland Housing Bureau and the mayor's staff, to launch a robust and inclusive community engagement process. And in order to get community agreement within a community of stakeholders in Portland, it needed to be both traditional and non-traditional partners. I think it's important to mention that the Housing Bureau didn't want to micromanage or overmanage this process. We wanted to be good stewards of the process. We wanted to make sure that we facilitated but did not direct or control the direction or the outcome. And I must say, with a group of this size, it would have been probably impossible to have done that regardless. At the same time, as you made your appointments to the Bond Oversight Committee, we simultaneously onboarded and did some organizational development and leadership, having hired Dr. Stephen Holt as a third party to convene and help launch the Bond Oversight Committee. So as the Stakeholder Advisory Group was devising the framework plan, we were preparing the Bond Oversight Committee to hit the ground running. Why is the framework plan so important to us? You might recall that the measure says that there will be audits. And by audits, it's not specific, but in my view, that would include both performance audits and financial audits. And an auditor needs a means by which to gauge progress and success to render an opinion. So we very much need a framework plan to guide not just the Bond Oversight Committee, but the auditors as well. Otherwise, we won't know whether or not we enjoy a shared success or not. Next steps would include, with your approval of and acceptance of this report, we would open what I call the transaction window for new proposals on Monday, October 23rd. And we're preparing a request for information that will be posted to the PHB website for that purpose. We'll continue to work with both internal and external stakeholders as we move forward. And I think it's very important to mention that the internal stakeholders include the Office of Management and Finance, Risk Management, Debt Management, the Auditor, and our City Bond Counsel, Hawkins, Della, Fell, and Wood. So that as we originate projects, we include both the external stakeholders, many of whom you'll hear from today, but also a very important bench of internal stakeholders who are crucial to our success. First and foremost amongst those stakeholders is Home Forward. You might recall that of the 600 extremely low-income units contemplated in the bond, that some 400 would be enhanced with project-based rental assistance vouchers. And what that means operationally is that as the Housing Bureau originates projects, we must jointly underwrite those projects because Home Forward will attach the subsidy to the units consistent with a subsidy layering protocol that HUD uses for all projects using vouchers. So the Housing Bureau, both on a project development basis and on an asset management basis, will be working hand in glove with Home Forward. And here with me today is the Executive Director, Michael Bonacore.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. I'm Michael Bonacore. I'm the Executive Director of Home Forward. I spoke this morning at a conference for finance professionals, so obviously I'm dressed for them. Home Forward's strategic, we're about a year and a half into our most recent strategic plan. And in the plan, there is an initiative that says we will work tirelessly to add more affordable housing in our community, regardless of our role or ownership stake, in alignment with other systems of care. And so we have our own agenda to add more affordable housing in our portfolio to preserve the housing that we have in our stock, but we are also committed to the idea that our experience, our systems, our infrastructure, our data, our resources, our public assets to be leveraged for the greatest good in the community. And that idea that we are obligated to contribute to policies and to the creation of housing resources that serve our cities and county for decades to come is why we're contributing vouchers and why we're working closely with Kurt and Shannon and Javier to figure out how we can best leverage the capacities between both our public agencies so the bond resources are delivered with maximum long-term benefits for the community. And speaking of that long-term perspective, I want to add to the thanks. I know that you've taken some hits for letting this process play out, and I think it's really important that that the community got to contribute to this framework in the way that it did. I know that your jobs require you to respond to crises and to react to immediate needs. And of course, you know that the most important work that you do will endure long beyond your tenures on council. And you serve a community that expects to be involved in shaping these efforts. Almost 3 years ago, we announced that we were going to project-based hundreds more of our own project-based vouchers, recognizing that folks who have housing choice vouchers were finding fewer and fewer opportunities to use them in the community, and more neighborhoods were becoming too expensive to use those vouchers. And so that effort recognized that if we could create some footholds of affordability in neighborhoods that were becoming more expensive, that we could at least provide some amount of choice that way. And at scale compared to the bond, this is a drop in the bucket. But we did go out to the community and talk about our intention around doing that. And we heard from folks like Nick Sovey at Rose, who's here today, and folks like Living Cully and Community Alliance of Tenants and Hacienda and Apano, who are working deeply in their communities, many of which saw gentrification coming and have laid a groundwork to organize their communities, know what is needed there, and want to create the opportunity for folks to stay, to devise their own solutions to what's happening in their neighborhoods. And so we recently participated along with the city in some groundbreakings out in Lentz and soon in the Jade District. And I think we're already seeing that what the community is asking for in this framework, that they're ready to help us deliver on. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways we can make this resource really effective in our community. So I want to thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity to work in partnership with you, and most importantly, for really listening to the voices of our community.
Thanks, Michael. Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you. Director Krieger, I think Frida's testimony really illustrates how challenging it has been to anticipate the unfolding impact of gentrification and displacement, to anticipate increased demand, and to also balance needs and wants of existing communities. So I'm wondering if in our screening criteria in East Portland in particular, if it's possible to include some kind of preference policy like we have been or are using in North Portland that would give a little more weight to existing residents of a particular geographic area, because I think that would achieve multiple goals. One, it would keep existing residents and their community members in their communities. It would decrease that impact that Frida mentioned on the schools of having an influx of students that may need additional supports. And it would get those individuals out of unaffordable housing and open that housing up for other people who may be able to better afford it.
I'm happy to comment on that. The preference policy at work in North and Northeast Portland was to specifically address wrongful actions taken by the city of Portland.
Absolutely.
And in East Portland, we have economic tectonics rapidly roiling the community and changing things. But that said, there's still quite a lot that the Bureau and Home Forward can do with respect to local preferences. For example, we own a site next to the Gateway Center for Domestic Violence. If there were something to be built there with bond revenues, it ought to be functionally tied to the mission of the Gateway Center, i.e. survivors of domestic violence, their children, foster adults. So we can do project preferences for specific populations within the fair housing laws, and we'd be very open to doing that. What we don't have are the sort of the grievances, if you will, that tie specifically to city actions. But what we have are economic conditions that disadvantage certain groups more than others, and we can help ameliorate or address those. So we're open to that, but it probably won't be quite as broad as the North-Northeast preference policy.
I absolutely understand that. The only thing I would maybe add to that argument is that many of the people who were displaced from inner Northeast Portland have ended up in East Portland, and they're now trying to create and hold on to community in East Portland. Thank you.
Excellent point.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. So now we're at the public. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Saltzman wanted to offer up an amendment. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Mayor.
Stick around for a second.
So I have an amendment I just want to put on the table since we're going to be taking testimony, and it deals with the definition of priority communities. And I think there's one priority community that I think that is important to me and I think to my colleagues, and that is children in foster care and families who are committed to raising those children. So I've added language to the priority communities under families, including intergenerational households. I've added including those supporting youth in foster care. And then under households experiencing homelessness or at a risk of becoming homeless, I've added a bullet that says youth ages 18 to 24 from the foster care system. So I think we all know that foster kids, they turn 18 and they are basically without any resources, and too many of them end up on our streets, on our couches, or even more dire circumstances. And there are a growing community of nonprofits and government, including the city of Portland, that are partnering to create community for these kids, and also to create communities where seniors are raising kids, or families are raising kids from foster care, which they intend to adopt. And these communities also have older adults who serve as foster grandparents. And I think this is for me, it's a priority population. I think if you all agree it is, we should be more explicit about it, because too often the needs of those in foster care fall through the cracks. I mean,
Well,
we all have good intentions, but I'd like some direct reference to helping kids in
Yeah,
foster care.
I'll second that for discussion.
Let's put it on the table. Commissioner Fritz seconds that for the purposes of discussion. So as people testify, if you have thoughts on that. Commissioner Fritz?
I'm just wondering whether we really need the 18 to 24, because there are some emancipated minors who might be out on the streets right now at 16. So what if we just said youth up to 24?
Okay.
From the
Yeah.
foster care system? A friendly amendment, I hope.
Yeah, that would be fine.
All right, good. So we appreciate public feedback on that. So, folks, we have about 20-ish people signed up, 3 minutes each. When you come to the microphone, if you could just state your name for the record. We don't need your full address. If you are a lobbyist, council rules require us to know that information. If you're here representing an organization, that's helpful as well. You may hear opinions differ than your own, so please respect everybody's opinions. We ask you not to verbally express yourself. Just a thumbs up or a thumbs down is good by way of registering your views on something.
Mayor?
Commissioner Fish.
I just want to make one comment.
Please.
The action before us is to accept a report, and I'm guessing a lot of people who are going to be testifying are going to urge us to accept the report, and that's their privilege. I will be particularly looking for testimony that says somehow some part of the report does not reflect their view about what a priority population should be, or a sequencing or something. So, I mean, the goal today is to accept a report and to move forward. And it'd be fine if 20 people testified to do that. But I think we're also interested in any of the concerns people have if they don't think the report reflects their view about how we should move forward. And so if you have a difference of opinion, by all means, this is the time to express it.
Very good. And 2 minutes and 30 seconds in, you'll see a yellow light. 3 minutes in, the light turns red, and you'll know that your time is up. There's a tradition when we have a lot of people signed up to testify, people with small children, people with disabilities, others with special needs. Feel free just to let the council clerk over here know, and we will accommodate you forthwith. Mr. Walsh, absolutely, sir. And the next two, please.
Will be Mark Jolin and Sam Chase.
Come on up, gentlemen. Mr. Walsh, you want to start us off today?
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice, and I am running out of oxygen, so I really need to leave. We take the position you're doing this backwards, and the 20 intelligent people that you had in your committee have it backwards. Salt Lake City, New York, San Diego, Seattle, all have come to the conclusion, after lots of money they spend, lots of time, that you must get the chronic homeless off the streets first. And here's why. They're the most expensive. They are the people that you lock up. They are the people that you spend all your money on sweeps. They are the people that end up in our hospitals, in the emergency rooms. Every statistic coming out of Salt Lake City tells you that. Where do you put the priorities? You put them on the bottom. You go after people of color first. Sounds nice. Wait a minute. On the sheet they gave me, the first group that you're going after is people of color. I'm saying to you, the people outside your building or down the street is the group that you must go after. You're going to build something for $258.4 million. I didn't know about the .4. That's $400,000, not chuck change we're fooling around with here. You're going to fail. I'm telling you. This thing is going to blow up in your face because you're doing it backwards. You're going after the easiest people, families. Who's going to argue against putting families in housing? People will argue about putting a drunk in housing. You have to get these people off the street. Low income, people that are struggling on the street have nothing to do with affordable housing. Nothing. Your theory is let's build affordable housing, get the people out of the emergency shelters, and then we can move the people off the street into emergency shelters. Look at what Salt Lake City is telling you. Doesn't work. Go after the most expensive first. How many times we gotta tell you this? You failed with the 10 years? You know that, Commissioner Fish. It was a total failure because you did it traditionally. And you're gonna do it again. And again. And again.
Thank you.
How many times does it take to do the same thing, get the same results?
Thank you.
And you look in the mirror and say,
Thank you.
this is insanity.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh.
Don't
Good
pay
afternoon.
me, please. That's annoying.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Sam Chase with the Coalition of Community Health Clinics and also Metro Council. And I just want to start by saying that Metro Council supports this framework and is really willing and ready to help step up and support legislation in Salem that would help give us more flexibility in implementing these dollars. And then I really want to take a second to thank you for creating a problem. And the problem is, how are we going to most efficiently spend these dollars to have the biggest bang for our buck in terms of delivering housing for our community? And it's you, I'm thinking, it's Welcome Home, it's the voters of Portland for supporting this bond measure. And I really want to especially call out Commissioners Saltzman and Fritz, and Fish, who spent a lot of time.
I have two.
Commissioner Fritz, too, but spent a lot of time.
It's a compliment where I come from.
Spent a lot of time on the phone creating this problem by getting the support out in the community and raising the resources and getting people on board and getting this passed so that we have this challenge now. I want to just add that I think we have some new challenges that we will really need to focus on moving forward. And this is going to be very helpful in terms of setting a precedent for our region. Because the way that we spend these dollars and how we spend our dollars effectively is a model for the rest of our region. Portland is one of 24 local jurisdictions in our region. It is a little over a third of the population of our region. And it has 2/3 of the affordable housing in our region. And we need more. We need more. We need you to do more. We need to continue to come in here and advocate for more. But you have 2/3 of the housing in the region, and there's another 2/3 of the region out there that we need to work together to bring on board. I work all over the region. I hear a lot of criticism. Portland's not doing a good enough job managing our region's housing. Well, we got to get the region on board to manage the region's housing. So I hope that you will join and work with us at Metro as we really work to do that. I've shared with you a white paper that we put together that really outlines a broad range of ways that we can very efficiently spend housing dollars on a regional basis, land banking, preservation, other strategies, funding strategies. There are a range of resource options that are out there on the table for us to consider. So invite you and everybody here to participate in that process, start having the discussions out in local jurisdictions all over our region, and really identify and develop those strategies and get a resource initiative on the ballot where the whole region is participating in solving this challenge.
Sam, can I ask you one question? So thank you for framing it as a regional challenge. And I think it dovetails nicely with what Frida said, because Frida said people are being displaced from East Portland as East Portland changes. So the question is, if they move to Troutdale or Rockwood, or if they move to East County beyond the Portland border, or if they switch sides of the river and head out to Beaverton and other places, how do we make sure there is a safe and decent and affordable place for them? So you're just one member of the Metro Council, but if you could be king for a day, what's your preferred path forward for bringing the region more dynamically into this conversation?
Well, I want to say that the entire Metro Council has supported this strategy to really evaluate resource options moving forward, and that's been a big step that we've been working for a long time. And I think we need a resource initiative on the ballot. I'd love to see something as soon as 2018. I don't think there's anything stopping us from doing something as soon as 2018. But I want the community to be part of the solution. Yes, are there many significant resource generating options? Yes. We need the community, other leaders from other counties to participate in identifying, and create that menu of options and bring those leaders into the process and have them start putting some pressure on Metro to say, this is the solution we want. And we need Portland and Welcome Home and our other community partners to be putting some of that pressure on the rest of the region and saying, look, we are doing everything we can, and it's not enough. We're going to continue to do a lot more, but we've got to have the whole region on board.
Thank you. Commissioner Fritz?
Councillor Chase and Commissioner Fish, you and I haven't had our meeting since the last time I went to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, which the Mayor has graciously allowed me to be on. Councillor Chase, I really appreciate your bringing this subject to the committee, which has representation from all 3 counties and the 24 cities. It's the first time in my memory that people from Washington County have agreed that we have a regional problem, and I think it's very much due to your leadership and your guidance of your staff there. So I'm actively excited about going to these meetings now, because there's sharing of information and there's a recognition that we are all in this together. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And actually at the last meeting, I had the very memorable first-time experience of having the chair of Washington County agree with the suggestion that I made. So I think we're on a good path, and it's in large part due to you, Councillor Chase. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Councillor, if I could add to the commentary. Yesterday, I actually started my day at a 7 a.m. breakfast in western Hillsborough. And people may wonder, well, why was the mayor of Portland speaking to a group of people on the far side of Hillsborough? And it's exactly because of this issue. The same trends that are influencing people chasing housing affordability east from Portland are also taking place to the west of us, where you're seeing a lot of gentrification, new business development, new companies being located, and prices beginning to escalate. You're seeing the same dynamic where people are being moved, of lower income being moved into areas that have less public transit, and therefore it's adding to some of the congestion and other issues that they're having. They're overcrowding in certain school districts and certain encatchments. We have to start addressing this as a regional problem. And that's going to require a real shift in the way we think about these social problems. It is very easy for people to look at the city of Portland and say, wow, Portland really struggles with housing issues, homelessness issues, addiction issues, mental health issues, transportation issues, fill in the blank issues. But the reality is, we need support from the surrounding region for us to be able to effectively address these issues. And I was actually very heartened that a group of prominent officials, including Mayor Steve Galloway from Hillsborough, they agree that they're seeing this regional imperative on all of these issues now. I don't think Portland's going to continue to be an island with respect to these issues, and I appreciate you and your colleagues' leadership on this going forward. We're going to need it, and we're ready to work with you.
Thank you, and I do think those leaders around the region are starting to really understand the affordable housing challenge, and now's our opportunity to give them some choices to get behind and really make a difference.
You bet. It's good to see you.
Mayor,
Thank you.
as we welcome Mark Jolan, can we just acknowledge what a terrific job Mark and Heather Lyons did on TV the other night, defending the city's position? Fantastic work.
Thank you.
I thought he did
No,
a
I agree there.
fantastic job, and I already told him that he was particularly effective because he memorized the polling data and was actually able to articulate what the polling data was saying as opposed to the narrative that some people wanted to project. So I thought he did a great job. Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor and Commissioners, I'm Mark Joel, and I am the Director of the City-County Joint Office of Homeless Services. And I just wanted to take a moment to start by thanking all of those community members who made this bond possible. To thank you, Mayor, your team, and the team at Portland Housing Bureau for the process that they led to get us to this framework. I'm, of course, particularly appreciative of the focus in the framework on people experiencing homelessness and at risk of homelessness, and in particular, people from communities of color who we know are significantly overrepresented in our homeless population. We're really enthusiastic about the focus on family-sized units because we see hundreds and hundreds of people and families in our shelters every night, and we know that hundreds more are doubled up in unsafe conditions. We need those larger units in our community. We're also especially excited about the 300 units of permanent supportive housing that are contemplated in this framework. You know from our last point in time count that the chronically homeless population was the fastest growing population in our community, a 24% increase over 2 years. That increase accounted for most of the increase we saw in our community in homelessness overall. For that population, the combination of deeply affordable housing with support services is often the only path off the streets in a sustainable way. We also know in our office that the bond is only providing for the housing portion of the costs associated with supportive housing, and that's why, as was mentioned earlier, our office is committed to continuing to work with the Housing Bureau to identify the resources that are needed to provide the ongoing services that will turn that affordable housing into supportive housing. We look forward to being a full partner with the Housing Bureau going forward on the implementation of this framework. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Next three, please.
Are Ted Gilbert, Sarah Jonitis, and Dan Valeri.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and County Commissioners, or Council Commissioners. Excuse me. For the record, my name is Sarah Jonitis, and I'm the Director of Social Responsibility at New Seasons Market. I'm here today as a member of the business community and as a member of the Welcome Home Coalition. And first and foremost, I want to thank City Council for your continued support for increasing our supply of safe, stable, and affordable housing. New Seasons was a proud supporter of this historic housing bond. Our business model was built on the idea that there's a fundamental link between the health of businesses and the health of our communities. There's an interdependence and a responsibility that we have as businesses to help ensure that our communities can thrive. Our current housing affordability crisis threatens the resiliency of our communities and the vibrancy of our city. It's a problem that touches all of us and that we need to solve together. We are very grateful for Council's leadership and for the collaborative efforts of the Bond Stakeholder Advisory Group and the Portland Housing Bureau staff that has enabled our city to set an example for how to address a regional housing crisis. It's my belief that the Welcome Home Coalition stands ready and committed to continuing to work collaboratively to advance strategies that bring more dollars to our region for affordable housing, especially for communities of color. We believe that the rigorous, deliberate stakeholder approach that you've led will truly leverage fully the bond investments to create housing for our most vulnerable families and individuals, balanced across all sectors of our city, while at the same time advancing racial equity and preventing displacement. So we're proud to be here today to celebrate this accomplishment. Thank you again for setting the vision and for shepherding this historic investment in our community.
Thank you, and thanks for your support, and thanks for being here. Thanks for your leadership. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ted Gilbert, Mayor, Commissioners. I have put my feedback and suggestions in writing. There is one element that I'd like to emphasize, so if I may, I'll just read you an excerpt. The city and Portland Housing Bureau are already faced with some structural limitations on the execution of this bond, not of their making. these being restrictions in existing state laws which prevent them from fully deploying their capital as the private sector would do in order to maximize impact. To me, this makes it even more imperative to do all that is within the bounds of safety and soundness, as well as legality, to maximize results and to use all the tools at your disposal. There is one tool that is alluded to in the framework plan, though not explicitly detailed, that could make a difference in product volume, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. This is the mechanism of turnkey development. This approach, in numerous variations, is frequently employed in the private sector. Under the current law, the City of Portland, through the Housing Bureau, must become the fee simple owner of the finished housing, utilizing for-profit, nonprofit, and community development corporations with the needed knowledge, experience, and financial capacity to provide some or all of the facets of development, including land acquisition and its funding, funding of pre-development costs, including entitlements, would be a wise use of public resources, monetary and human. PHB staff or an owner's representative could provide oversight during the process. The finished product would be delivered for PHB ownership once completed, free of any liens or encumbrances. There are numerous facets that can be included in a turnkey development agreement, including offloading construction cost risk and interest rate risk onto the turnkey developer. All of the construction screens that are desired, for example, minority hiring, prevailing wage, and green building, can be incorporated. In summary, the public can leverage their substantial yet precious bond capital with private sector capital, along with the latter's market knowledge and experience, while at the same time mitigating the public's risk. It can be used for new construction and acquisition rehab. In my view, this is good business judgment and good public policy. I sincerely hope that you'll take advantage of this tool. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Good afternoon.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler, Council Commissioners. For the record, my name is Dan Valliere, CEO at REACH Community Development. REACH is a member of Welcome Home Coalition. We'd like to thank the City Council for continued support for increasing our affordable housing stock and for this unprecedented opportunity implementing the bond, and appreciate the Stakeholder Advisory Group a lot for all the time they put into it, and appreciate the clear statement of focus, particularly the advancement of racial equity and promoting greater community benefit. This is on target and a hopeful sign. Today, I just want to highlight one area of concern in the framework, even though largely, obviously, supporting it. And that is the section on development, operation, and services. I believe that, and it actually sort of relates, didn't realize what we were testifying on, it kind of relates to the PowerPoint, that it alludes to some things, but there's not a lot of clarity on the anticipated roles of community partners, whether that be nonprofit developers, whether that be community-oriented for-profit developers, it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, being more clear on what are the anticipated roles of community partners. It could also be service providers. And I think going forward, that's something we should really continue to define. There's going to be opportunity for proposals or for ideas to be submitted, but for partners to not have some clarity on examples of those roles, it makes it difficult to know what's being sought. It could be things, you know, hiring partners as fee developers to develop a city-owned project. It could be to sell land. It could be to do turnkey development. It could be to hire partners to perform asset management or property management or resident services. There are many different roles we could play. So being more clear about some of those roles, which ones are the highest priority that are needed the most by the city, that'd be good clarity. So I just offer that. And again, I believe this point about clarity of roles is particularly important if we want to achieve the racial equity and community benefit aspect of this, because many community partners have deep experience in the community and can leverage relationships and insight by being engaged directly in the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, all three of you. Commissioner Fritz.
I was just going to say, Mayor, that at the end of all testimony, I'd like Kurt Krieger's opinion on, because from the way I'm reading the guidelines for development, it doesn't preclude turnkey, but that's certainly something that I hope we'll be looking at. So thank you very much for testifying on it.
Very good. Thank you. Next three, please.
Are Nick Sovey, Lightning, and Carrie Lyons.
Hello, Nick. You want to start us off?
I will.
Thank you.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for the chance to testify. My name is Nick Sovey. I'm Executive Director of Rose Community Development, member of the EPAP Housing Subcommittee, and I've also been on the Welcome Home Steering Committee since its inception. And like a lot of people here, I've knocked on a lot of doors, and it's really exciting to get to this point. So I support the framework. The city and Portland Housing Bureau have really stepped up in a big way to deliver this invaluable resource. Want to focus on a few points. One is just to emphasize the geography, that the bond investment should be spread throughout the city. I think folks would like to see that, and East Portland really needs that kind of investment. PHB is making increased investment in East Portland. We'd want to see that continue, and I think there's many opportunities in East Portland, including relatively affordable land, existing housing stock, and at-risk renters. The second point is scale. I think that not all of the bond investment should be large 100-plus unit projects. A mix of scale achieves more effective service delivery and makes it possible to serve more neighborhoods. I think it's also better to prevent displacement. Then I'd echo some previous points about encouraging PHB to partner with the nonprofit affordable housing community to develop and manage bond projects. CDCs have the capacity to develop and operate these projects. We have a long track record and existing relationships in the neighborhoods and with service providers. So thank you for taking the time to get this right, and I really support this framework going forward.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Good afternoon. So Mayor Wheeler, city councilors, and friends and colleagues here today, my name is Carrie Lyons, and I am the new director of the Welcome Home Coalition. I'm primarily here today to say thank you. A year and 2 days ago, my friend and colleague Justin Burry sat in front of you and said that the city needed to take bold and courageous action to solve this housing crisis. And in that year, that is exactly what you have done. Thank you for setting an example of innovation, taking risk, and creating needed solutions to build more housing within our region. I also want on this historic day to recognize everyone in this audience who took the time to knock on doors, to make phone calls, and dedicate tireless nights and weekends to ensuring that this would happen. We're grateful for their energy. And I think it's important during the middle of a housing crisis to celebrate wins. It's a very trauma-informed approach to recognize good moments. With that said, I want to also thank the Portland Housing Bureau, specifically Jennifer, Michelle, and Shannon. This process was one that was not purely transactional. We were not there just to provide input as a checkbox. It was transformational. We took words, we took language, and we eliminated it because folks didn't agree with it. And that is a very transformational process when it comes to stakeholder engagement. The City of Portland is going in the right direction, maintaining longevity and permanent covenants on communities and affordable housing. As we implement the bond framework, we want to encourage the city to continually consider engaging impacted communities in the decisions about where they would like to live. Passing the bond implementation framework in new areas of high opportunity while maintaining geographic diversity throughout the city will decrease the risk of communities being displaced. We also recommend the council consider various housing types when preserving buildings and purchasing land, for example, mobile homes, and we suggest setting aside partial funds for purchasing land for mobile home parks to prevent displacement. The coalition is looking forward to hearing periodic updates, continuing our strong partnership with the City of Portland. Mayor Wheeler, I'm happy to hear you use the words regional imperative. The Welcome Home Coalition is now a regional effort, and we're here to work and partner with you to create changes and build more housing within Washington, Clackamas, and Multnomah County. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your leadership. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Watchdog X. Now, Commissioner Salzman, I'll say it to you again. You got out of your seat and put this together. I sat in front of you and said, you know, Mayor Ed Lee out of San Francisco is doing these bonds. Why haven't we done that in Portland ever before? You got out of your seat and put it together. It would not have been put together if you didn't do it, period. Now, I'm going to watch this very close on the outcome, and it's going to fall on you, Mayor Wheeler. You're in the seat now, and we're going to see what you're going to do. As far as on Portland Housing Bureau, Kurt Krieger, very impressive. Very impressive to have someone sit up here and say, I want these performance audits, I want these financial audits, I want to know what we're going to talk about to the auditors and make sure they go over everything on this. As the public, you couldn't have said it any better. That's what we want to hear. Full transparency. Great work. To Mr. Ted Gilbert, I absolutely agree with you. From my position on this bond, I want to see development. I want to see jobs created. I want to see the most volume of units possible put together. Everything Mr. Gilbert stated, I absolutely agree with. Again, I have a problem about purchasing seasoned units. I do not want the city competing with the local investors out there for those type of units. You need to build new. This needs to be your inventory. Don't compete with the private sector for the seasoned units. That will drive up rents, drive up prices. I sold commercial real estate, was in the business for over 15 years, and trust me, I know every investor in here, from Mr. Gilbert from the Envoy, and every investor from Jordan Snitzer in this city. And let me tell you something, you do not want to compete against the private sector for seasoned units. Big mistake. Build new, create jobs, buy the materials in the area. It's the best thing that will ever happen for this city. Hit a good number, have good family-sized units. And again, to you, Commissioner Salzman, this is your legacy. Congratulations. I don't know why you threw in the towel, because I think you would have easily won, but congratulations and enjoy your retirement when you decide to. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Richard Elmeyer, Sumitra Chetri, and Emily Burnt.
Good afternoon, Richard. Do you want to go ahead and start while they're making their way up?
My name is Richard Elmeyer. Ted Wheeler is not a moron, as is Donald Trump. Neither is he a sociopath who compulsively lies about facts, policy, everything, like Donald Trump. Nevertheless, Ted Wheeler continues to mislead the public about his policy of targeted, unlimited neighborhood concentration of public housing and denies them access to meaningful, accurate, complete, and timely public housing statistical data, which is what allows Wheeler to load the neighborhoods of his choice with up to 100% public housing clients without being noticed or held accountable. My Portsmouth neighborhood has the highest number of public housing clients in any neighborhood in Portland. Nevertheless, Ted Wheeler is loading another 14 public housing units into Portsmouth. When will he stop overloading my neighborhood with public housing clients? At 50%, 75%, 95%? While my Portsmouth neighborhood has greater than 30% public housing clients, Ted Wheeler's neighborhood has 0% public housing clients. If Wheeler collected public housing statistical data from the Housing Bureau and the Public Housing Authority of Multnomah County, we would find that the neighborhoods of most city commissioners also have 0% public housing clients. This is known as politically self-interested economic segregation. Without meaningful, accurate, complete, and timely public housing statistical data, Ted Wheeler can only make housing policy decisions as his predecessors, Charlie Hales, Sam Adams, Tom Potter, and Vera Katz did, by self-inflicted ignorance, political convenience, and extortion. Wheeler is aided and abetted by the City Club of Portland, the Portland Business Alliance, the leadership of every neighborhood association in Multnomah County, the nonprofit groups that make a living on public housing taxpayer dollars, and local religious institutions, who all have given silent approval to Wheeler's discredited and abhorrent public housing policy. When it comes to housing policy, Ted Wheeler has chosen the politically easy path by following the NIMBY economic segregationists rather than leading his constituency toward a transparent, data-based, defensible road of equitable distribution of public housing. And so it goes.
Thank you, Mr. Allmeyer.
We
Good
missed you,
afternoon.
Richard, we missed you.
Well, thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Nick.
This is a first for me, I think.
The first for you and the mayor, so.
Oh.
Well, folks, don't forget, I had a prior life prior to sitting in this chair. I'm well acquainted with Mr.
You were building up to this moment, Ted. You were building to this moment.
And please give your partner my regards. It's good to see you, Richard. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Sumitra, and I currently work with IRCO Asian Family Center with community, a very diverse community, people of color, immigrants, and refugee community, and I'm also here representing Welcome Home Coalition. As I was writing my testimony, I tried to draw a lot of statistical data and all that, but I figured that I'm not expert in housing policy. So today I'm going to share the experience that our community is facing, specifically immigrants and refugee community, because of housing shortage. One families that we worked, family of 5, they were living in 2-bedroom apartments, and they couldn't afford to live in the apartment anymore, so they had to move out. So they couldn't find any affordable. Both their parents worked like 12, 13 hours a day, and they work really hard to put food in the table, but they couldn't afford to rent 2-bedroom apartments with their 3 kids. So they had to look for other apartments, and they couldn't find it. And eventually, they had to go live with their other family members, and 10 family members lived in 2-bedroom apartments. You can imagine what that is like. And when they were moving in with their parents, other family members, their kids had to move school, they had to figure out new transportation to get to the jobs. And this housing shortage is a real thing. When you think about families, when you think about children, when you think about our community members who can't really find affordable housing, even though they work a lot and they're taxpayer, right? They're working a lot to contribute to community, but because they can't find a place to stay and where they call home for themselves to be home, it's really difficult for like us, like community leaders, or someone who works for a nonprofit, and we feel really helpless because we have no resources for them to help, right? We call dozen apartments, we call so many affordable housing places, but there's no units available for people to be part of it. So having more affordable housing, especially in out of Southeast Portland, would be very useful. And then those families who work hard, who contribute to this society, can actually stay in the apartments, and their kids can go to school they wanted to do, so their kids don't have to move to school every couple of months, right? Because there's the rent is just going up again, like every couple of months, and so they have to move out from one apartment to another, and that affects their kids' schools, their jobs, and all aspects of life. So I also want to thank you, everyone, mayors and commissioners, for working hard to ensure that we get more affordable housing in the city.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Hi, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Emily Barrett, and I'm the Director of Partnerships for 211 Info. And 211 Info, we are a nonprofit agency that serves Oregon and Southwest Washington to provide community resources and referral. Last year, we had over 700,000 contacts, and that is people calling us, texting us, emailing us, or utilizing different technology platforms to search for services. So I'm here today to talk to you about housing, but as a member of the Welcome Home Coalition, we appreciate what you have done, and I'm here to thank you for that. But also wanting to talk about 211 Info. We partner with many stakeholders statewide to provide data and trends about who is accessing or who is in need of services by calling us and utilizing our services. So this is a housing report. This is our most recent housing report for Multnomah County. And as you can see, that one of the top referrals is housing. And under that is a breakdown of services. So top request is rent assistance, then community shelters, transitional housing, so forth and so on, as you can see down. And also on the next couple of pages, you will notice we ask many different demographic questions of our callers. And you can see on page 3, 36% of those who identified their race as African American or Black were in need of rent assistance. And so really here to provide that information for you. Within the next pages, you can look at the breakdown of the zip codes, who's calling us and accessing services and what their needs are. 211, we are a point of entry for community services and community members. 75% of our callers are below the federal poverty level. So as you would imagine, we are making many different referrals to community resources. Top needs are housing, energy, food, and shelter. With housing, we are hearing more and more from callers who are doubling up, tripling up their families. People who have had unexpected bills, new bills, then in return they cannot pay their rent. Rent has increased. We are hearing that from a lot of callers. But what we are hearing is that people are wanting to stay in the catchment areas where their children are going to schools and having to move out. Just really kind of here to say thank you. And thank you for the board framework, but also here to show you what we are hearing.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Thanks, all three of
Thank you
you.
for your service, too.
Next three, please.
Are Margaret Bax, Stuart Emmon, and Tanya Wolfersberger.
Very good. Margaret, you want to start?
Mayor, can I just ask a question real quick?
Certainly.
Could you tell us about your badge and where I can get one?
Oh, one of these.
We're outside.
I feel left out. Oh.
You can get one from Monique at the Welcome Home Coalition.
Okay. I will, thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Bax. I'm retired housing policy manager for the city of Portland and former emergency room nurse. I was also a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. I want to thank you for allowing me and other members of the community to provide input on the bond implementation framework. We learned a lot from each other and about the people in our community who are usually left out of decision-making, including those who are in desperate need of safe, affordable housing. A significant challenge for this stakeholder advisory group was making responsible recommendations regarding the bond without knowing the city's overall housing strategy or plan. You know, what the city's housing priorities are, what resources you have to address them, et cetera. It became clear that there isn't one yet. I believe that we as a community need to develop a clear strategic housing plan that sets priorities of what we intend to do over the next 3, 5, 10 years, whatever range you all choose to address. This should include specific targets and goals for the populations to be housed and include income level and number of units by size. This plan should consider all resources, the money, land, tax credits, vouchers, et cetera, that are available, and a strategy for maximal leveraging of all of the public and private resources. It is appropriate for the city to provide the leadership for this effort as you control most of the local housing financial resources and you have the political mandate. However, the city does not need to or should it do this alone. please involve real meaningful community input from the people needing the housing and those who actually deliver the housing and the services necessary for them to remain stable in homes. Portland has an impressive array of local community-based nonprofit housing providers who have been serving our community for decades. Most have received national recognition for successful, innovative, and cost-effective programs. They are extremely valuable partners with deep connections in our neighborhoods, the business community, and service providers. Just yesterday, there were over 800 people attended Ed Blackburn's retirement lunch. They were current and former staff, volunteers, board members, neighbors, contractors, business reps, hospital, and other service providers. These people reflect deep partnerships and relationships that have been developed and nurtured over many years. I saw people there who I hadn't seen in years come out to honor and celebrate Ed and Central City Concern's work. Each of our nonprofit housing providers has
Go ahead, Margaret, you're almost done.
Each of these nonprofit CDCs has these broad-based community partnerships, longtime supporters, and they are all working every single day to provide housing and the necessary services to the most vulnerable people in our city. In my opinion, these CDCs, along with Home Forward, should be much more involved in the city's planning, building, operating, and managing of the housing developed with the bond and with the other city resources. The Policy Council of Oregon On should be used to identify specific strategies to get the most out of the housing bond resources. The SAG group did not take a look at development strategies or those things. We focused on priority communities, location, and that was all very valuable, but we did not get to our charge was not included, it did not include, and we did not get to talk about some specific strategies for really getting the most out of the resources. So I really want to push you to push your staff to be as flexible and creative as possible to get the most leverage out of these bonds, use these community resources to get the most out of all of our resources and house the most people. City can't come close to solving our homeless crisis alone. Please reach out to and involve the community more. The Bond Stakeholder Advisory Group was a great effort. Please do more. And we've been the most successful in this community when we have been inclusive and worked together. Thank you again for allowing me to participate and for your time today and for allowing me to go a little bit over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's excellent testimony. We appreciate it. And in fact, we are going through an internal exercise where this is completely germane. So I wanted you to keep going a little bit. Thanks, Margaret. And we'll be calling on you again. Thank you for all of your help thus far.
Go rattle the
Thanks.
rafters.
Stuart, would you like, oh, sorry.
He's going to pass the mic to me
Very
first.
good. Excellent.
Gentleman
Either
that
way.
he is. I'm Tanya Wolfersberger. I am with Housing Oregon, formerly Oregon Opportunity Network. I am here as a member of the Welcome Home Coalition. And just easily, I want to just share my appreciation for what City Council is doing in support of this framework, in support of the bond, also PHB's work in moving this process forward, particularly in their commitment to using a racial equity lens and making sure that location and community serves are a priority within those decision-making frameworks. I also wanted to just echo what Margaret was saying and to just really encourage you to take advantage of the expertise within our community, within our nonprofit housing developer community. There are a lot of bright, very well experienced, innovative people working on housing who have been working in housing for decades. So please do not overlook that expertise within your community. I would also say to keep challenging yourselves and pushing yourselves to make sure that you're connecting with the people who are going to be living in that housing, because at the end of the day, it's always about the people living in the housing, and they should take priority on those choices. So, I think you're also in an auspicious place, because as a statewide member organization, our members outside of the city of Portland will be looking to what the city does as an example and how you're utilizing this unique resource that has come at your doorstep, and we're all going to be anxiously awaiting the success so other jurisdictions might have an opportunity to to replicate that system. So thank you. Stay strong, stay courageous.
Very good, and thank you. And I just want to underscore the 2 points you made because I agree with both of them. Number one, engaging and leveraging what already exists in the community. I agree with you. There's a lot of expertise and knowledge out there. And number two, engaging with the community that's directly impacted by these efforts. So on both fronts, I want you to know we're in philosophical alignment. And thank you for your leadership. Stuart, you get the last word on this panel.
Thank you. And I'll follow up with that and say that our startup community, entrepreneur community has a lot of ideas about innovation. When we did Quezon Chaco Haas, we were looking at innovation in housing to look at speeding up production and lowering unit cost. And the RFP process from the Housing Bureau didn't really look into ways that we could utilize what we learned on that project and go into second and third projects up to scale. There needs to be a way to do that so we can really work on lowering unit costs. Right now, our bond is, I believe, $198,000 per unit. Can we get that down? So the other thing I want to talk about, a couple things, speed. The RFP process should be designed to speed production of projects. I think our back to Quezon, it was about, 2.5 years, 3 years to get that project online. We ought to think about getting projects online much faster. At BDS, I think we ought to have a freeway through BDS for these projects. There should be a concierge service, there should be somebody working through planning, and we should just do whatever we can to get them through BDS immediately. And obviously working with state and other funders to streamline the process. So we have 4,000 homeless people, 1,600 unsheltered people. In this bond, we have 600 units of 0 to 30. Can we use innovation to raise that number? There will continue to be hundreds of tents in this city on our streets after this bond is completed, and I have a real problem with that. I think all of us have a real problem with that. So I think alongside this bond, we ought to implement another plan to bring on the other units needed to get everybody off of our streets. I wrote an editorial, some of you probably read it, and some people said, oh, you're crazy, you can't do this in 2 years. Back to private industry. There are people who do top-down approaches. They sound impossible in the beginning, and they make them happen. And if they don't make them happen, they go out of business. So I think we ought to bring the private sector in, we ought to bring innovators in, and take a look at this problem holistically and work to a solution as rapidly as possible. Let's surprise the voters. Let's impress the voters. Thank you.
Stuart, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So my recollection is that the housing development that you referenced in Lentz was assembled over a weekend.
Yeah.
So when we had all those prefab units that were shipped up from outside of Salem.
Yes, yes.
It was assembled in a weekend.
Yes.
And what you said in your testimony is very compelling to me, that we were test driving an idea, and they were beautiful units.
Thanks.
I mean, they were.
You and I went in them.
Thanks. Was ready to move in. I mean, they were beautiful, and the finishes were beautiful. But the other part of that story is they were made in Oregon.
Yes.
So displaced people displaced in the timber industry and other kinds of things were involved in making these units, and they were shipped up I-5, assembled in a weekend. The point that you just made in your testimony is that we haven't really tested the true benefits of that kind of modular housing because we've never done it to scale.
Correct.
So let me ask you the mother of all leading questions. Are you suggesting that either in one of our urban renewal districts or as part of our request for proposals on this bond, that we frame an opportunity for someone to come to us and show us what to scale would actually look like using modular housing?
Yes, I am.
That's why I said it's the mother of all leading questions, because I agree with you on this.
I mean, it doesn't have to be specifically modular, but something that is innovative, that really, and also figuring out what happens in the second and third iteration of that. But we need to think differently about our housing. We need to get more people housed, and we have to bring in more innovation in. And so, absolutely, we ought to be doing that. King County's doing it right now. They have an RFP out for modular housing. So we should be doing it here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Udately.
I just want to speak to the BDS
Yes,
issue.
sure.
Because we really have devoted an extraordinary amount of time and resources to to working out some of the issues with the Bureau, from updating the software to working
Thank you.
with all the permitting bureaus to uncork those bottlenecks and streamline the price process. We're absolutely prioritizing affordable housing, filling our vacancies at the Bureau because our staff is stretched so thin. And we are adding back at least the small business concierge. So for some of the small-time operators, there will be that kind of assistance that you're talking about, and I'm certainly interested in considering another level of assistance for affordable housing developers in general.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
One more word on the modular
Yeah.
housing, because I agree with you. I actually think it's an exciting opportunity. And this is far from the old days of something that looks like it belongs on the back of a truck. There are some really impressive designers and architects who have completely reinvented what that modular housing can be and how it can look. And we are actually already in conversations with landowners and developers to potentially bring a project like that to scale. There's some big names that are very interested in that here locally. But the more the merrier. As you've heard many people testify, this is going to have to be an all-hands on deck effort. And that's the theme I'm hearing today, and I couldn't agree more.
So Mayor.
Yes, Commissioner Fish.
Music to my ears, but the only way we're going to test innovation is if we pick a project, set the parameters, and then challenge the community to come in with the best answers to that. It can't be a boutique thing, because that takes us back to the old days of wanting to do a Frank Gehry project as a showcase. And you actually end up spending a lot of money. I hope the vision is to set the marker for the kind of volume you want and the kind of quality, and then see what the marketplace responds. Because whether it's a habitat-type housing from Montreal, whether it's I mean, there's a zillion ways you could do it. What you demonstrated in the Native American housing in Lentz is that you don't have to sacrifice quality. In fact, the quality was extraordinary. You had more choices for things like windows and light and air, but it brought the price down. It brought the price down without compromising on any of the values that are baked into this report.
And if I could just add, I just got back from Vancouver, BC at a modular conference, and they just put up a 40-unit modular project, and they have a goal of 600 units. So they're doing it in Vancouver.
Thank you.
And I went to visit it. It was really fun. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, all three of you. We appreciate it. Next three, please.
Are Sahan McKelvey, Ron Peterson, and Randy Rappaport.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Council Commissioners. My name is Sahan McKelvey, and I'm a member of the executive team at Self-Enhancement, Inc., SEI, and also here as a member of the Welcome Home Coalition Steering Committee. SEI did not participate in the initial stakeholder advisory group that helped to craft this current framework, but as a member of the current member of the Welcome Home Coalition, we are committed to continuing to work with the city and with Multnomah County to advance solutions that bring additional revenue for affordable housing and specifically for communities of color. We appreciate the council's commitment to addressing the growing housing crisis and also appreciate the specific lens of racial equity that has been used to develop the current framework. We understand that this has been, and will continue to be a very difficult task. We also understand that addressing the housing crisis through a lens of restorative justice is a complicated and time-consuming task. As a participant in the Welcome Home Coalition, SEI is committed to working towards solutions that our community can see working immediately. And we will do our part, everything that we can, to ensure that tangible progress is being made, even within the time-consuming process that will take place through the multi-year facilitation of this bond measure. Additionally, as we continue to focus on prioritizing restorative justice and racial equity, SEI will be emphasizing through our role with the Welcome Home Coalition, as well as through our role as a voice for our community, that the African American community needs to be given realistic options to access affordable housing that is acquired or developed through this bond in North and Northeast neighborhoods that so many of our community have been displaced from. We understand that this bond is not a vehicle to completely reverse the effects of displacement and gentrification that has taken place in our traditional community neighborhoods, but we do want to do what we can to ensure that displaced African Americans have options to return when possible, and that will be in addition to the stated goals in the bond framework to provide accessible and affordable housing in Portland neighborhoods such as David Douglas and East County, where many communities of color currently reside. So in conclusion, SEI just wants to reiterate our support in the work that lies ahead for all of us as we work together to ensure that we get this right. And we also want to ensure that we express appreciation for the work that's been done to this point. So we want to say thank you to the Stakeholder Advisory Group. We want to say thank you to this body for being able to see this through. And with that said, let's get ready, roll up our sleeves, and work together to get this done.
Right on. Thanks, Sahan. Good afternoon.
Hi, I think he's supposed to be next.
Sorry, go
All right,
ahead.
very good.
Would you like to go?
ahead.
You want it? You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, okay. So, President, are you the president of the council?
Madam President, to you.
Madam President. Love that.
She's been waiting to say that to someone.
That's from like that show, one of the stars lives here. Do you know that?
What? No.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you about it in the future. But my name's Randy Rappaport, and I'm with Fox and Moose developers. It's been a underground in the best of ways because it can gather information, in a stealth kind of, so it kind of can make decisions that are maybe more from like 1,000 feet in the air. So I wanted to I'll read my thing. Okay. It is more likely that if this bond will be successful, if this bond is received well, this bond resource is a drop in the bucket of increasing need. I actually think that in the sense of marginal statistics, as we've seen with the increasing need in homeless services, that the need may actually increase as time goes on, as costs, rents go up faster than median family incomes. Mm-hmm. And that may be even more powerful for those below AMI 80, and probably more gains power as you work your way down to 30. And then the other, below 30, it's different because of other subsidies, perhaps. For every unit you fund, there's demand for, I estimate, 50 more. And that fits in with my prior comment. We should make sure that the geographic mix of units is outside of URAs. There have been arguments about, which I think is the approach and goal, because there have been arguments that you don't want to put all of your affordable housing in, say, an area that has received so much of it, which the URAs have been funded to. That's been is that correct?
The way I read this document, Randy, there would be a priority for non-URAs.
That's how I read it.
We've already made the investment in
Right.
the 15%, and there's lots of areas that don't have affordable housing, so there would be necessarily a priority for those areas.
I agree. Okay. I'm almost there. Let's see. I think that there should be a two-pronged approach here, as you'll be voting on today. First, you should look at strategic acquisitions of existing housing units purchased with the bond funds. That means being very mindful of cost-benefit analyses around buying existing units versus the building of new units. That's a kind of a complex. Can I keep going for a minute? One more?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is the first time we've met, Mayor. I'm happy to meet you, and congratulations.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
my
I'm gonna-
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, turnkey housing units should also be developed, which will actually increase the supply of housing in the area. Purchasing existing units alone does not increase overall supply. Another point of importance regarding the mayor's commitment to ecology, purchasing existing housing units is more expensive to maintain as well, nor is it nearly as ecologically efficient. All that said, strategically purchasing existing and developing new housing units together is the best way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor. My name is Ron Peterson, and I have a question for Commissioner Fish. Is there, sorry about that. Is there any possibility, or are they still, is City Council working towards the spot over at 3rd and Hoyt?
I don't know, sir. We can find out and get you an answer before you leave today.
Okay. I agree. A lot of the housing needs to be modular. And it's not going to be easy because there are going to be a lot of zoning laws that will need to be changed. I was with TPI a long time ago, and I saw it was pretty effective in most assets, most ways, but it wasn't necessarily an asset to the city itself. Sustainability, I really believe the best way to go would be either stick houses, little tiny houses, or modular houses. It's like when they built the new center over by the not TriMet, but the Greyhound and the train station. Sorry about that. I was not thrilled with CCC at that point in time. And so I had to put forth a reminder that Portland had actually kicked out CCC at one point. Trying to think on how, I really don't believe that putting a housing unit with 200 beds in Northwest is going to be, because the people that have businesses, small businesses around Northwest Portland, they're really in disagreement. They don't like the idea because they think it's going to be too close and too many people, and it's going to be a jumbled mess. As I stated at the other meetings, it's going to be a magnet for all the homeless people, which is going to be a disaster in the Northwest area. I really think that MAG is something that I've been going to from time to time. My pastor is actually in charge of the Milwaukee area, and so I've been going to that. And I think they have some really good ideas there. But I really believe, because they're trying to put together and get the zoning changed, and we've been talking with Congressman Marge Schrader, and she's done a lot of really good work for us, and we're trying to get everything switched around so that the zone is correct so we can go ahead and put up the tiny houses. And I think the modular houses here in Portland would be a good thing. A business city or a business government combination is actually going to be the best benefit, I feel, for the city. It's going to work out the best because you'll have the business side and the government side working hand in hand in order to help coordinate everything that needs to get done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ron, Randy, Sahan, thank you, all three of you, for your testimony. Next three, please.
The last two I show signed up are Garrison Creamer and Kelly Haynes.
You got it, and they should name it after your mother.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Good afternoon. Garrison Creamer here. I am a freelance infrastructural consultant. 10 years ago, I graduated from FSU with an international affairs degree. I stayed at an eco hostel in Peru, right on the coast surrounded by the desert. And they were growing food. And it was a great little tiny home community. I ended up snapping my ACL playing a soccer game. And then I flew to Panama. My tent was on my bag. They stole it at the airport. I was very upset because, this tent was the foundation of my lifestyle. I thought about that tent for 7 years. All the possibilities of where it could go, I took into account. Government regulations, I took into account the news, I took into account the design of the tent, I took into account the name of the tent. And 7 years later, I knew exactly where that was, my tent, and I found it in Northern California. And eventually I connected to a criminal ring, and that tent's right over there. How do you know it's my tent? It still had the chalk from a job that I had done, not to mention the earphones that I never used still in the pocket. Pretty impressive, I think. Anytime you expand your balance sheet with debt, you're putting more workload on the people at the bottom. Now, I don't know if you agree with my definition of inflation, but I believe that inflation is the expanse of the money supply that causes the real prices of values, or the real prices to rise. And many times we use the numbers as an indicator of inflation when in fact, what you've actually done is stolen from the inventor who has waited patiently with the solution. So the key is not to panic. I do not advise you guys to go through with this. And I am sure that there are inventors with better solutions. When it comes to the design, you're talking about zoning. I don't have enough time to get near what I need to say out. I'll say this. You're trying to solve homelessness, and you may agree on this proposal, but do you agree on the cause of homelessness? The homeless population is one of the most diverse populations there are, and it's more the outliers that you're dealing with. Oh my God, there's too much. I want to know why people can't buy hot meals with their EBT, because if you know Maslow's hierarchy, you know that shelter comes on the bottom, but I'm going to say that temperature precedes that. So when you're trying to put someone in a home, you're trying to take them out of the elements. You're trying to give them lack of stress from the temperature. Now, I appreciate you extending my time. The light rail, for example, when you go into Hillsborough, that goes right to those beautiful apartment complexes. If you try and get in those apartment complexes, a one-bedroom's $1,200, very easily manageable for 1 to 2 people with a minimum wage. But the requirements are 5 times more than the rent month. So that's $6,000 a month times 12. 6 times 12, that's what, $36,000 you're requesting for someone to live in a one-bedroom. The issue I have is that public transportation is going to apartments and excluding the people that need the public transportation the most. For instance, the counterfeiters.
So I'm going to lose my quorum, and I want to make sure we take a vote. So if you could start wrapping up your thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Let me wrap it up in one sentence if I could do that. The sustainability word, that's a loaded word, and that means more to maintain. I think we need to change the word to regenerative. And again, I just want to know if you agree with my definition of inflation, which is the expanse of the money supply, which causes the real prices to raise. And I also want to know if you agree on the causes of homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kelly?
Thanks. Thank you for your time, commissioners and the mayor. My name is Kelly Haynes. I'm here representing the Metropolitan Alliance for Workforce Equity today. We're a coalition of trade unions, contractors, training organizations, and community-based organizations. So I wanted to just quickly say thank you for moving ahead on the housing bond policy framework. I think the work and the input the community groups and members have provided has helped to really shape an implementation framework that will maximize the positive impact of this investment. I do want to touch on a related aspect of the racial equity components of this policy framework, and one that I think has relevant and real potential to further contribute to opportunity and stability for marginalized communities. I think we have concerns regarding the lack of specific local workforce and contracting equity components and corresponding metrics and goals in the policy framework. We see this as a significant missed opportunity to ensure that this public investment not only helps to house and serve vulnerable populations on the resident side, but also ensures that the way in which the funding is spent creates real and lasting economic opportunity for those same populations. By applying a community benefits agreement on these funds, the city could ensure these important projects are structured to enhance city-community partnerships and realize significant and tangible community benefits with this investment. So I quickly want to just go through a math exercise to help illustrate this point. So the housing bond is for $258.4 million, and I think in reading the community feedback, there was a desire to balance that with both acquiring new projects and building new construction. So if I just did a quick split of half of that funding going toward new construction activities, that's about $129 million. And using estimating methodology in the industry, that's about 636,000 work hours for that amount of funding. And if you use an average wage of $25 an hour, and then apply the CBA goals to that for women and people of color, that's over $5 million in wages for marginalized communities locally. If you actually apply the performance of the CBA pilots, that's at over $8 million in potential wages for women and people of color. So I think the CBA could help provide real access to jobs by those very people facing the risk of displacement. Also, for contracting equity, if we applied the 17% CBA goal for minority and women-owned companies, that would equal almost $22 million in business revenue. And again, if we applied the past performance of the CBA pilots, which was 26%, to this funding, that figure would increase to over $33.5 million in business revenue for minority and women-owned companies. According to the last procurement report, annual report, the percent of utilization by these same firms was under 6%. So that would be, if that was the performance of these housing bonds, that would be a loss of $26 million earned by minority and women-owned companies. So just in closing, I want to reiterate our support for the housing policy framework and all the hard work that was put into developing it. Actually, a lot of Maui members are allies and were involved in a lot of this work, like Rose CDC and Hacienda. So we are in support of that work. We just encourage the city to consider applying an already effective tool to these dollars to be able to realize multiple benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Garrison.
I just
We
wanted to
appreciate
correct
it.
myself. 6,000 times 12 is 72,000, so my numbers were off by 2.
Very good. Thank you,
Thanks.
sir. I'll entertain a motion, colleagues.
So let's vote on Dan's amendment.
Okay, very good.
It's been
Please
moved and
call the roll.
seconded.
Daly,
Thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, for raising this issue. Aye.
Fritz,
Yeah, good catch, Commissioner Saltzman. Aye.
Fish,
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. I'll entertain a
I
motion.
move the report.
Could I just have
Commissioner
got one
Fritz?
question? I mean, obviously, lots of really good testimony today, and you already acknowledged, Mayor, that you're working on Margaret Bax's section. I just wanted a quick answer on the
Yes,
on the
Commissioner
turnkey,
Fritz, Madam President.
Thank you.
This was a question on redirect from Ted Gilbert's testimony, as I recall, about the so-called turnkey development method. Under Oregon revised statutes, that would be considered an alternative contracting method. And we broached the subject with the city attorney's office about how best to proceed, and have met with purchasing several times with OMF senior staff. And we would need to come back to council with a pilot for a demonstration of what the sideboards would necessarily be with respect to wage rate and women, minority
So
business
could I just
participation.
summarize what you're saying is you're looking at it and it might be possible?
It is legally possible, but needs to be constructed as a pilot, and you need to authorize that pilot, and it needs to be dollar specific, and it needs to be time limited, so that upon completion, we go back and you, when you're considered judgment, deem whether or not that pilot was successful before it becomes a regular part of our toolbox.
Thank you very much.
Further questions, colleagues? Commissioner Fish moves.
Second.
Second.
Commissioner Daly seconds. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Daly.
Well, this has been a very interesting and insightful hearing. I want to thank everyone who presented and gave their testimony today. I know the community has been anxious for us to start spending these funds, but I want to thank the mayor's office and the Portland Housing Bureau for taking the time and coming up with this framework that is both intentional and meaningful and focusing on goals that address historic housing inequities. I apologize, I'm a little under the weather today, so my voice is sounding a little crackly. It's clear that the process the mayor's office engaged in to tap into community expertise across the entire city was necessary to avoid making mistakes that could lead to unintended consequences and leaving out certain vulnerable populations. And we certainly got some great feedback today for further consideration around those issues. This is a finite resource that's paid for by our local residents, so anything less wouldn't have been responsible use of these funds. So thank you, Mayor. I particularly want to thank the mayor's staff and the staff from Portland Housing Bureau, as well as ONI staff, our community liaisons who played a role, and of course all our community partners, everyone who served on the committees, and last but not least, all our incredible housing justice advocates, activists, and warriors. I really don't think we'd be where we are today if it wasn't for you. Thank you to everyone on the Housing Bond Policy Committee, with a special shout out to our office's picks, including Frida Christopher, Andy Miller, and Alan Lazo. And I want to give extra thanks to Alan because he's also going to be serving on the Housing Bond Oversight Committee and continuing his commitment and contribution to this issue. With that, I gladly vote aye.
Fritz.
Well, all of the thanks Commissioner Daly just noted. I'm very happy that we've got this resource to spend. I'm also very happy that we have community members who were engaged and are going to continue to be engaged and pushing for different values and principles, and that's how we're going to get to a good product. So I know that the Mayor will be very mindful of all of this input and continue to get more community advice, because it really does feel like we're all in this together. That last year when we were campaigning for the bond measure, and everybody was really happy that we had something we could do to address these major needs within our community and within all the communities of Portland. So it's a good problem to have, and it's not a problem, it's a challenge which I know that we can rise together to meet. So thank you very much. I do know that when I looked through the report, I was concerned about people experiencing disabilities. That's in there, that we're going to do better than the minimum. I was concerned about, should we call out women? That's also covered by vulnerable people, as are people who are already outside. Commissioner Saltzman drew attention to foster kids aging out of that system. We heard this morning on huge need for people experiencing domestic violence, and to have the Director Krager coming and say, well, we could possibly put something right next to the centre is extremely exciting. The other thing that was addressed to my satisfaction was about the Russian communities and others. I mean, really, even a two-bedroom is not all that big when you're cramming 10 people into it, or 2 families. So we certainly do need to look out for opportunities to make it so that families have a place to stay that's actually livable for the duration. Thank you very much, everybody, for your involvement. Aye.
Fish.
I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have already said, because I think they touched on most of the key points and the thank yous. Colleagues, I do think this is one of the most interesting hearings we've had in a long time. And I thought the testimony was particularly rich. here's a couple of takeaways for me that I'll be watching as we unfold. Number one, and this is really channeling to the director of the Housing Bureau and to the Oversight Committee. I'd like to see a pilot that puts a premium on modular housing to scale. It's time. This is a resource we can use outside of an urban renewal district to do it. So let's be intentional about it. Let's frame it up and let's see what the response is. I think Margaret Bax is right. I think we now have potentially 3 or 4 different kinds of plans which have to be reconciled into what's called a strategic plan. They include the priorities of the Housing Bureau, a home for everyone, this advisory group recommendation. We can go on and on. How we knit those together, I think the challenge we have in a commission-style form of government, one of our most significant challenges, is how the 5 of us craft a single narrative that the public can follow about the direction and future of our city. And most of the criticisms I hear from people about local government is they're not sure what the narrative is. And I think that's in part because they hear so many different strands of the narrative. They don't have a clear and unitary narrative. And I think around housing, we have to make an effort to reconcile a number of very thoughtful exercises we've gone through and set a clear vision for how we're going to spend money. And it should be the money that's being spent not just at the city, but also at the county and with our nonprofits, because frankly, the public does not distinguish among different players and who's spending what dollar. The color of money issue is lost on most of us, much less most of the people we serve. So I think we have to have a unitary vision that involves all the resources, and I think we've actually made enormous strides in that direction. But let's see if we can sharpen the narrative. I am extremely proud that this calls out for 300 units minimum of permanent supportive housing. And I should note that next Wednesday at 10:15, Council will be taking up a resolution that has broad community support to set a goal of at least 2,000 units over the next 10 years, a goal which we're hearing from some people is not either bold enough or quick enough. So we'll have that conversation next week. But it is at least a recognition that responds to a number of the comments we had today, starting with Joe Walsh and ending with some other folks, that if we're really going to get our arms around chronic homelessness, we must have a strategy which addresses people who have faced the biggest barriers. And if we do not spend the money marrying intensive services with housing, we're not going to have successful outcomes. And that, by the way, was actually the hallmark of the 10-year plan. We just ran out of dough. And we're saying, let's go back, put old wine in a new bottle, and let's keep at it. I'm very pleased with the racial equity lens. I have to say, I've waited 7 or 8 years to have Frida or someone from East Portland come to us and say, we want our fair share of affordable housing, and make the argument that people who are low income and are going to school districts in East Portland deserve the same choices and quality that other people have. And it's not just home ownership. So I think that was something of a breakthrough. I also want to offer my thanks to the stakeholder group that obviously went through a thoughtful process. I want to thank the staff that guided that process. I want to thank the 5-person oversight body, including my nominee, for taking on that responsibility of reviewing how we spend the money. And Mayor, I want to thank you and your team for pushing this. I do think it's worth taking a little time to get it right. I think we now have the blueprint. The director has said that in short order, a call is going to be issued so that people can respond and bring the most creative thinking in our community. I would make this, the most transparent and competitive process to get the best ideas. And, we've heard from people that said preservation is the most cost-effective and environmentally friendly approach. We've heard people say new construction or some combination. We don't know until we solicit the best ideas from the community. But it's exciting. And finally, I want to close on kind of a sour note we heard from a number of people, that somehow this would not solve our housing crisis and that somehow this had been mismarketed. This alone is not going to solve our housing crisis. Any more than 2,000 units of permanent supportive housing is going to solve our homelessness crisis. But I would remind people that you have to go back to David Stockman and Newt Gingrich, who many, many years ago upstream said, if we starve the beast in Washington, we'll create a series of train wrecks down the line in the local government. And right now, we're having a conversation about how the city of Portland solves a national problem. And I welcome that conversation, and I think we should do everything plus. Whatever it is, we should double it. But let's not forget it's a national problem. And so when we have fewer Section 8 vouchers to invest, when we have fewer dollars that are flexible, dollars for housing development, where we have fewer dollars for HOPWA, and we have fewer resources across the board, tax credits and the like, then we can do less. Or we can ask the region to do more. And the question is, at what point do we hit the breaking point where we're asking the region to take on what used to be seen as a national problem or a state problem and has now become a local concern? I'm very proud of the fact that locally we're stepping up. But our system was never intended for Portland, Oregon to solve a national problem, and we should not have the hubris to accept that premise. We'll do what we can. This is a major step in the right direction, and I'm incredibly grateful that the Portland voters gave us this tool. Aye.
Saltzman?
Well, I want to thank Mayor Wheeler and the Stakeholder Advisory Group for their work in putting together this roadmap, and also to the Bond Oversight Committee, who will have been busy, but they'll be even busier now that they have this roadmap, and now that the window for business will be open on October 23rd. That's really good to hear. And I really appreciate just want to thank Portland voters for having faith in this bond measure and approving it. Aye.
Wheeler?
As was said many times over the last several weeks and today, we're in a housing crisis. The time for action is clearly upon us, and this council does have a sense of urgency with regard to the problem. Portland families need safe, accessible, and quality housing, and I believe that this strategic framework provides us a direction for accomplishing that. This past week, my colleagues and I heard testimony from many struggling Portland residents. Just this week, we heard from tenants who shared that their rent had increased 9.98%, who couldn't afford the increase and couldn't afford to move without relocation assistance, which this council put into place. We heard from members of the immigrant and refugee community that discriminatory practices were preventing them from finding quality, affordable housing. The Oversight Committee, or the Advisory Committee, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, has told us they want that to be part of this framework. We heard from elected officials and community leaders that this is the experience of families across the metro area and throughout the state of Oregon. The City Council hears you, Portlanders. We hear you. This framework is moving us forward towards preventing displacement of our most vulnerable community members. It helps to stabilize families, and it builds the infrastructure that we need to create livable, affordable neighborhoods all across our community. Complementary to this bond are additional tenant protections like relocation assistance and inclusionary zoning that all of us are committed to strengthening, in addition to supportive housing mechanisms that ensure wraparound services are included in housing solutions, as Commissioner Fish just described. I want to thank everybody, obviously, who testified today. I want to thank you also to our invited panelists for sharing your stories and your willingness to partner with us on addressing this crisis. Thank you to the Portland voters who stepped forward to be part of the solution and entrusting us with this important resource. I look forward to continuing to work with the Bond Oversight Committee, and I'd like to thank the staff of the Portland Housing Bureau for all their hard work on this. I'd also like to thank the members of the Stakeholder Advisory Group and the Portland Housing Advisory Commission for your hard work with the Bureau. Opal Environmental Justice, MACG, and Home for Everyone for your community engagement efforts. And of course, the community engagement liaisons for ensuring this process was accessible and culturally appropriate. I definitely want to thank my staff, Andrea, Cupid, Kyle, Michelle, frankly, all of them for their hard work. I vote aye. The report is accepted as amended. Thank you, everybody, and we are adjourned.